I'd start by saying just the map of understanding of what is a person. The Torah and Penimis Torah tells us that we've got guf, nefesh, ruach, neshama. We've got a physical body. We've got an animated aliveness that's in that body. We've got an emotional, creative part of who we are, and we've got our thoughts. And so all of that is part of the unity that makes up a human being. And when you start to look at a person that way, you start to realize that all of those realms are very relevant to health and well-being.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Frum Health Club Podcast. I'm your host, Mendo Krashinsky. Here at the Frum Health Club, we believe that health is not separate from our Yiddishkeit. When the body, mind, and soul are aligned, we are better able to serve Hashem, our families, and our communities with strength and clarity. Today, we're joined by Dr. Schiller, a physician with world-class medical training and decades of experience in integrative and holistic healing. Dr. Schiller earned his medical degree at Duke University School of Medicine and completed double residency training at Harvard Medical School in internal medicine and physical medicine and rehabilitation. He is board certified in physical medicine and rehabilitation and holistic integrative medicine, and is fully licensed in Israel, New York, Connecticut, Florida, and New Jersey. His approach is based on the modern science of systems biology, which reveals the intimate relationship among all the body systems, including thought, emotion, and belief. Since the 1990s, Dr. Schiller has been helping people accelerate healing and recovery from health crisis, chronic pain, and chronic illness. Grounded in conventional medical science, he has extensive training in natural medicine, including nutrition, osteopathy, energy medicine, and mind-body medicine. He helps his patients reconnect to inner resources of healing and employs techniques and principles from the sages to help his patients go beyond mindfulness to mobilize soul-powered healing. He is fascinated by the rich intersection of modern science, healing, and Torah principles. Dr. Schiller, welcome to the Frum Health Club Podcast.
Thanks, Mandel. Nice to be here.
Could you share what drew you to medicine originally, and how did your understanding of healing evolve over time?
Right. Wow. Such a good question. I think I was drawn to medicine because I was confused and didn't know what I wanted out of life. Strange enough, because most people go with this incredibly burning desire. You know, I grew up the son of a doctor. My father was a pediatrician in a small town in Connecticut, like house calls with the black bag in the back of the car, in addition to having an office and working in the hospital and all that. So I was around medicine. My sister became a nurse. She was the oldest kid in our family. And I didn't really want to go into medicine. I studied mechanical engineering. I was really into understanding like how things work, how the system functions. And, you know, I went to MIT where mechanical engineering isn't just about nuts and bolts. It's like fundamental principles about how systems relate and how complexity works and how energy flows through a system, whether it's mechanical or electrical or thermal. So it really kind of fit with this sort of deep thinking neshama I think I had, but I didn't know it was a neshama. And so, you know, I went out in life as an engineer, but got very interested in mind body techniques and transformational tools. I was really interested in like, how do I become a better person? How do I live with more confidence and clarity? And so I did all this mind body stuff. I started studying like movement arts, like yoga, tai chi, moving meditation. And I think that stuff really opened me up to a different level of connection with life and reality. And I found it just incredibly interesting and curious. I was working with all these like complementary practitioners socially and in my martial arts training. And they kind of opened up this other world of healing that was so foreign to where I was coming from. And I got really interested in it. I started reading about it and I thought, wow, I want to go to medical school and figure out how all this stuff connects. How does this integrative, like natural healing mechanism relate to what we do in modern medicine? And yeah, that's how I got started. And then as I got to medical school and residency training and saw like, okay, this is the state of art, the art of how we're doing it, and look at all the things we're neglecting about the human experience, about
Wow.
people's thoughts and emotions, how conventional medicine, for all of its miraculous, scientific, incredible stuff,
Yeah.
can leave the person behind and kind of treat people like a piece of meat, unfortunately. And for me, it often seemed kind of cruel that there was not a recognition of the humanity of the patients because there wasn't a recognition of the humanity of the doctors. It's very military and kind of like structured.
Mm.
And so I think that was also part of what influenced me to think about a broader way of looking at my patients and understanding what was going on for them.
You trained at Duke and Harvard. So at what point did you realize conventional medicine alone was not enough?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, as I said, I was already getting involved in natural approaches, and that was mainly through like movement and breathing and meditation and that sort of thing. And I had a feeling that that was going to be relevant to patient care and to helping people, but I didn't know how. And then I got to medical training, which was awesome. Like the science is amazing, and I have so much respect for the scientific method and how we figure stuff out in medicine and the miracles that I was really like zoche to be participating in. Like, somebody comes into the emergency room and their blood pressure is 50 and they're basically dying. And we do a
Wow.
bunch of stuff and we like do all that invasive stuff with the lines in the ICU and we save their life. It's like it's unbelievable. And just like I
Yeah.
remember for 14 hours watching a liver transplant, like wow, amazing. But I also saw that there was a certain neglect of the humanity, both of the patients as well as the doctors. And there was a
Wow.
neglect of what I understood to be real principles about how mind, emotion, and body interact with each other that I'd learned experientially. It wasn't just theoretical. It was like, okay, I felt what it was like to stop and get quiet and notice how it shifted so much about life and how I felt and mood and concentration, even my athletic ability. I was really into sports when I was a kid, but I wasn't very good at it. And then I went and I did all this like martial arts training where you move really slow and breathing. And suddenly I was like one of the best guys on the field. I was like, how'd that happen? That's from
Wow.
bringing the mind into the body. So,
Wow.
okay. So I already had this sense that look, there's a lot of potency in mind body techniques, and we're not doing any of that in the hospital. It's like the
Wow.
person's stressed out, they're anxious, they're grieving, they just lost a leg, they just lost a family member, they just had a stroke, and they're feeling horrible. So the doctor comes and prescribes them an antidepressant. And I'm like, how about just listening to them and recognizing their suffering and connecting and just
Wow.
intuitive human stuff that I didn't see happening. And then for sure at that time, I was in med school in the late 90s and early 90s, 1990s, and it was just the very beginning of mind body medicine. It was only the 1970s or 80s where Herb Benson first started studying the relaxation response and figuring out that there was this physiology of stress and relaxation that had such an impact. So these things were just starting to knock on the door of sort of academic medicine, and most people thought it was a bunch of nonsense. But I already had an intuitive feeling that it was relevant and true. So I used my weekends and vacations during medical school to study mind body medicine and healing and had more beautiful, deep experiential experiences that I think shaped the way I perceived my patients and perceived the application of all the scientific medical knowledge.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So what does it mean healing the whole person really, in what does that really mean in practice? Because
Right.
as you mentioned, many people go to the doctor and they're
Yeah.
just treating the symptoms. They're not even
Yeah.
trying to figure out, what's
Yeah.
actually the
Yeah.
underlying
Yeah.
cause.
For sure. For sure. So, how do I respond to that? What does it mean to treat the whole person? Well, I'd start by saying just the map of understanding of what is a person. Like the Torah and Penimis of Torah tells us that we've got guf, nefesh, ruach, neshama. We've got a physical body. We've got an animated aliveness that's in that body. We've got an emotional, creative part of who we are, and we've got our thoughts. And so all of that is part of the unity that makes up a human being. And when you start to look at a person that way, you start to realize that all of those realms are very relevant to health and well being. And so that's one thing, is just the outlook of looking at the complexity of a human being as not just being a physical piece of meat like they often do in conventional medicine. Like I remember my first day on orthopedics residency or rotation, and the senior resident's presenting the case and says, the knee in room 14. And I was like, oh, like, no, it's a nefesh room, a shaman room 14, but they didn't really want to hear that. So I kept my mouth shut. But like the knee in room 14, the liver transplant in room 24, like that's the way doctors are trained to think and talk. And the best doctors get beyond that, but not everybody does. So the first thing in thinking about whole person medicine is looking at what's the wholeness of a human being. And the second thing, like you already mentioned, is thinking more towards root cause, where conventional medicine mainly thinks about like, okay, I've got these categories that enable me to define a disease state, and here's the protocol for treating that. And then the expertise and the nuance is the subtleties of how to alter this medication, that medication. Do we do surgery? Do we chemotherapy? Like, how do we apply this same model, which is mainly about looking at this downstream end organ? All these processes have gone on for years or decades to this disease state. How do we treat the disease? And it's not really how do we treat the person.
Yeah. So how do you approach finding the root cause rather than just treating the symptoms?
Great. That's a great question too. So I like to think about a metaphor of a tree. And this is what I learned in functional medicine, which is kind of an offshoot of conventional medicine, and integrative medicine. And it's apt. It's an appropriate metaphor for Jews thinking about health to think about a tree, because, our connection to life and to Hashem is tree of life, and we are the tree of life. And there's an amazing board on Parshas B'Shalach we could talk about if you want to, about how healing really is about the tree. Any event, thinking about how to do root cause medicine. I like the metaphor of a tree, that the roots in the ground are genetics, early life experiences, what happened in utero when the person was in the womb, because these can really shape the fundamental physiologic patterns of the body and mind. Then you got the trunk of the tree, which is the triggers, the events that have happened in the course of a person's life as that tree grows. And so maybe it was trauma, maybe it was lots of treatment with antibiotics or toxic medicines, maybe it was a toxic exposure on the job, or environmental pollutants. Maybe it was a horrible illness, or the person was in intensive care who had a horrible digestive infection when they went to India, or who knows what. But the point is that something happens that shifts the system, and then the equilibrium of that system gets locked in to that pattern, and then that generates disease. From those trunk of the tree, we get to the big branches, like when the tree starts to spread, and that's where we talk about what you might call the basic biological variables in the body. I have a slide I could show to just sort of point that out. Would be useful.
Okay.
So in those big branches of the tree, we have fundamental biological variables that are shown. You probably can't see my cursor, maybe you can, but the digestion, defense and repair, which is the immune system, cellular energy, which is this very complex process. And many people have heard about mitochondria as cellular energy. Detoxification processes, your liver, your kidneys, your sweat glands, your lungs, we're constantly removing toxins from the body. Transport, like your lymphatics and your cardiovascular system, the communication system of all the chemicals that your brain, your immune system, and organs all use to talk with each other. And your structure, your bodily structure, like your skeleton and muscles and bones and tissues, which are metabolically active, as well as subcellular structures, like on the level of your tissues, the structure is connected to the function. And so all of these variables are like the branches, the big branches. And from those branches, there's output into the leaves. And the leaves are like the organs, like your heart and your lungs and your brain and your metabolic system. And most of medicine is working out in the leaves. It's working like the psychiatrist is thinking about your mood and your psychiatric well-being and what's going on in your brain. The neurologist is also thinking about your brain and your nerves and studying brain and nerves. And the rheumatologist is examining your joints or other tissues to see if there's inflammation, and so on and so on. But all of that's coming from these big branches, which we call the fundamental biological variables or biological imbalances. And so when I do a history, I start with the roots. I think about the trunk, which is the triggers or events. The roots are the early life experiences, genetics, and intrauterine experiences, if that's relevant. And we think about the big branches. And then, of course, we think about the disease process that conventional medicine looks at, because if somebody comes into me and they've got joint inflammation and I examine them and their joints are hot and red and painful, the holistic approach, the integrative approach could take 3 or 6 months to fix that. And by then they may have destroyed their joints if they've really got bad inflammation. Or, I see a lot of people with pain. And if somebody comes into me and they've got signs that they have like an infection in their spine or an abscess in their spine, that's not the time to do osteopathic manipulation or mind-body medicine, because sometimes there's a disease that needs attention right now. So we need to know the disease processes, but then think more deeply about what are the underlying variables that are generating that disease process, and what might be the more fundamental variables that developed that process over time. We like to think about like disease is a process flowing down a stream, and there's upstream causes and downstream effects, or a snowball that rolls down a mountain and it gets bigger as it goes. Where did that snowball start? What's it coming from? How can we intervene in a way that addresses those fundamental causes and underlying imbalances?
Wow. Wow. Very, very interesting. Very insightful. Okay, so if someone is listening right now and they want to be proactive about their health and longevity, what would you suggest for them?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's so many aspects to it, right? And I think for me, finding myself in a position of often advising people about well-being and longevity, but also people who have serious chronic illnesses or chronic pain, and they're looking for a way out of it. And when people are motivated to do stuff about it, or even the stuff doctors do, I have a little mnemonic that I like to use that helps put things in context. I have a little image of it. Maybe it'll be helpful. Should I put it up here?
Yeah, definitely.
So the mnemonic I love to use is the 3 M's, right? And this is just what occurred to me after decades of practicing, but the 3 M's are like 3 circles that are all intersecting with each other. And as you can see, there's one circle that's about mind or mind-body relationships. There's another circle about movement. That's your movement, structural, mechanical system, what you use when you exercise and have physical treatments. And then there's metabolic or biochemical stuff. And these are like 3 windows through which you can look at your well-being and how you're doing, and 3 windows that it's good to think about as a big picture framework for what you're doing to enhance your health and well-being for the long term. And so let's just unpack them a little bit. So, let's start with the metabolic. Let's start with the metabolic biochemical. I just called it metabolism here, but it's basically all your chemistry, all the stuff that's happening inside the liquid, your immune system, your nutrients, your metabolism, your blood sugar, your control, your waste removal in your cells, all the things your organs are doing that are biochemical are incredibly related to things like what you eat and how much water you drink and supplements you take. And there's a lot to that process of optimizing your overall metabolic biochemical picture. The second part is this, what I name movement here. It's the movement system, but it's your mechanics, it's your structure, it's physical things you do with or to your body. And the obvious thing is exercise. And so, whether it's endurance training like running or cycling or using a elliptical machine, or it's weight training or stretching, all of these things are ways of improving the health and well-being of your structural mechanical system. But it also includes things that are done to you like massage or osteopathy. There's various physical treatment that might be electromagnetic or hands-on. And then let's not forget, of course, that exercise has 2 main groups. There's what I think traditionally in the West we think about as exercise, like running or bicycling or playing team sports or weight training, but there's also what you might call mindful exercise, things that are moving meditation, whether it's yoga or it's Tai Chi or Qigong or things like that. And then there's things that are kind of in between because there's lots of awareness in it, like Pilates or Feldenkrais, which are different sort of movement exercise techniques. And yeah, so that's mechanical structural movement system. And then there's your mind body system. And it's just what it sounds like. It's like, how do we use our intelligence and mind to influence our physical functioning, and how our physical functioning influences our intelligence and our mind? And so the obvious place that this shows up these days is people think a lot about stress and relaxation. And maybe people are doing breathing techniques or vagal tone techniques or vagal hacking, meditation, breathing. And, these are things people have been doing for thousands of years, and there's all sorts of sort of anecdotal evidence about how they have benefit. But recent decades, we've got more and more and more and more piles of research that these things have a huge impact, not just on your state of mind and whether you feel stressed, but on your immune functioning and your digestive functioning, on your neuromuscular functioning, on your sports performance. And I also want to touch on the growing scientific evidence that we have about like applied mind states, right? Like generosity, social connection, forgiveness, purpose, doing meaningful activities in life. We have research showing that those things actually help with measures of inflammation and longevity and overall sense of well-being. So those are those three main systems: mind, metabolism, movement. And let's not forget how intimately integrated they are. I draw them as separate circles to demonstrate that we can think about them independently, but they're connected in the middle. And where life happens is where those three circles meet. And you'll notice in that diagram, there's a little kind of glowing center. And that's how I think about the neshama, and make sure we don't forget about that we have this little light inside of us that is actually vitalizing us and giving us life. And despite the fact that we live in this overall culture, which tends to be kind of mechanistic. And, I just saw something in Scientific American that said, where does consciousness come from? And it's talking about how the brain generates consciousness. Okay, that's a mechanical, mechanistic worldview that's never been proven. They assume it's true because they don't want to think about God because it's messy and they can't measure it. But like we know that there's Ein Sof, there's light coming through our neshama, through our body, and that actually influences what's going on. There's a lot to talk about that for sure. But I think the thing I really wanted to mention is that these three systems and the neshama that irradiates and illuminates all of it are so profoundly interconnected. When you use your muscles or even stretch your muscles and tissues, it lowers inflammation. It generates metabolic factors and chemistry that affect the way your body uses glucose and uses oxygen. When you relax and you feel in a positive state of mind, physical performance improves, endurance improves, metabolism decreases and slows, immune reactivity or inflammation actually decreases. People think that like meditation is just sort of like, okay, so you feel relaxed, but we know about vagal tone. Most people have heard about that by now. We know that the vagus is this big nerve that comes out of the brainstem and goes throughout your internal organs. And when we do breathing exercises or meditation, it increases the activity of that nerve, slows the heart rate, increases something we call heart rate variability, which is the healthy fluctuation of the heart rate that is associated with greater longevity and all sorts of amazing positive health benefits. But what a lot of people don't know is that like industries investing millions of dollars in invasive and non-invasive vagal nerve stimulation, because when you stimulate the vagal nerve with this like electronic probe that they can insert in your neck with neurosurgery, I'm not suggesting you do that, but when you do that, it actually turns off these chemicals that are called cytokines that drive inflammation. And so there's growing evidence that doing that can take people with horrible depression and just stop it. Take people with horrible inflammatory arthritis and reverse it from turning on vagal tone. But you turn on vagal tone every time you quiet your mind and relax and breathe. You turn on vagal tone if you go for a 10K run on the beach in Ashdod, and afterwards you sit down and you have a cup of water and you have a hug with your daughter, or you talk with your wife, or whatever it is. You get into that calm parasympathetic state. You're turning on vagal tone. That's anti-inflammatory. So, yeah, whatever. There's more we could talk about that, but it's like it's real stuff, and it's all integrated in this one system.
Wow, so insightful. Thank you for sharing that. So there was a topic that we were discussing, the mind, body, and the Jews. So if you could share a bit
Oh,
about that.
yeah, sure. Okay, so um, you had a guest recently who I watched, and I loved the podcast. He was a man in his 90s who was so fit and limber. Michael Kaufman, amazing, so inspiring. So he said something that I felt like was such a home run. He said, as Yidden, everything we do to maintain and build our health, we need to understand that it's for Hashem. It's so we can serve Hashem better. We can serve our families, our communities, and like that's what it's all for. So just remembering that. And I think that's such a beautiful framework for thinking about mind body, because it's really about what's the kivun, what's the intention. And, I'm not good at quoting psukim, but we've got a bunch of them that say, look, you who are Devik and Hashem Hayom, you're alive. Chaim kulchem Hayom. That there's this thing called Devekud, which is being connected to Hashem. And Devekud can mean lots of different things, depending if you're thinking about Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, depending if you're thinking about your intellect, your emotion, your body, your vitality. We've got like all my bones praise you, Hashem. We've got the Slono Rebbe talking about how emunah, there's an intellectual emunah, there's emunah in the heart, there's emunah in the bones or the body. Emunah is connection to Hashem. It's Devekud, the Baal Shem Tov, Rebbe Nachman, lots of other people. It's connection to Hashem. And when we're actually connected to Hashem, we're shifting what's going on in all of our systems, mental, emotional, physical, neshama, ruach, guf, nefesh. And so when I look at Hasidus and Kabbalah, I see all these hints and directions about how we have this inner operating system that connects our mind and our emotions and our body and our neshama. And we've got these tools of whether it's during prayer or Torah learning or actual meditation or breathing that come out of our tradition from our sages about actually plugging into godly awareness. And I think it's really important as Yidden, when we think about integrative medicine, to realize that most of what's going on in Western society is very physical. It's very Gashmi. It's coming from a worldview that's like, and I see it all the time, like even my wonderful integrative medicine colleagues who are thinking holistically, they'll talk about when someone's very stressed, well, they need to learn to regulate their immune system and hack their vagal tone and blah, 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 blah. And that's really important. But why does that person have so much overactive stress response? And for a lot of people, it's because there's wounding, there's trauma, there's pain. And at the core of what pain is a sense of separation. It's disconnection. And the core connection that we all have accessible to us is connection with Hashem. And depending on what your way is of connecting to Hashem, whether it's Tehillim or breathing or meditation or being with your family or learning Torah or Hasidus or a Blat Gemara, if you have the kavana while you're doing that this is about connecting you to Hashem, that is turning on signaling going through your whole body, that's flowing in and turning on that vagal tone and turning on a sense of I'm connected to source. It's okay. It's deeply healing depending on how much you bring that into your heart. So,
Yeah.
So all of my integrative medicine colleagues throughout America and many places in the world are acknowledging the issue of balancing the stress response and mindset and mindfulness and emotional regulation and positive actions. But we've got this even deeper idea, this higher and more comprehensive understanding from the sages about turning on the light of our neshama, whether we do that through learning Torah or through prayer or Tehillim or acts of kindness that we're doing with the intention of serving Hashem. And that actually illuminates and potentiates all of the physical things that we're doing. You can be doing all of the best physical, biochemical, structural things to help your health. But if you also plug into the inner light and let that percolate through you, it's going to turn the volume and amplify the benefits of all those other things that you're doing.
Wow.
So in terms of that gentleman's comment about remembering it's for Hashem, I think it's right on. but I invite people to take it to the next step of bringing that into our knowing, intellectual knowing, emotional knowing, embodied physical knowing. Could I give a couple of case examples about how this has shown up clinically and in life?
Definitely.
It's a 17-year-old kid that I know. He's so special, and he's got horrible chronic abdominal pain that's preventing him from doing the things he wants to do. This is a kid who excelled in yeshiva, has all kinds of creative stuff, playing musical instruments, loves to play sports, friends, socially active, amazing person. But he is debilitated by abdominal pain to the point where he doesn't leave the house a lot of days. He doesn't go out and do stuff.
Wow.
So he'd done all those interventions like I talked about, all the functional integrative medicine stuff, all the psychotherapies and all of that. And he sat down and I said, well, what's going on for you? He's like, I've tried all this stuff, but I just can't breathe through the pain. I'm like, what do you mean breathe through the pain? He said, well, they taught me to breathe and relax and let the pain go, but I just can't do it. And I'm like, okay, let's try something different. How about you don't you stop trying to relax and feel your breathing. And be aware that you're breathing. And remember the pasuk that says Hashem was nifach ruach chaim b'toch adam. And remember that mechadesh kol yom tamid, tol yom tamid, maaseh bereshit. You're being created every moment. And right now, Hashem is breathing you, just like he breathed into Adam Rishon. So he sat there breathing, concentrating that God's breathing him. And he's relaxing, he's dropping into it. And remember what it says in the Midrash, like on Tehillim, Kol Hanshama Tehillah, Neshima v'Neshima is a neshama. That when you're breathing, your inhalation is your neshama. So he went with that, and he's just breathing his neshama, and he opens up his eyes. Like 5 minutes later, he's like, "Oh my God, my pain's gone." That's amazing.
Wow, that is crazy.
And he came back the next week. He's like, "That was game changing. I actually know what to do now." And so it was about not running around in the world of it. Let's just think nefesh neshama for a second, if we can do. Nefesh is all those biochemical, biological reactions. Nefesh is my anxiety, my fear. Nefesh is my identity. My nefesh behema is that part of me that's in my body with all of my beliefs about who I am. My nefesh his nefesh developed abdominal pain over years. It's part of his identity. So what we did is we had him give some attention to that and then go up to his neshama and let go of the nefesh and realize he's a neshama and be the connection. And that's das, right? Dat, dalid, ayin, taf, dat, das, depending on your inclination. But what is it? It's chibur, adam, yadat, chava. It's the chibur between your neshama and your goof, among other things. But just by giving him that das to plug into a neshamadik experience while he's experiencing the painful experience, change that whole experience. So there's a lot more to that process that I do with people, which is, for so often, it's just, it's like Hashem is the source of life and the source of love. And there are so many of us who are walking around feeling unloved, feeling unlovable, judging ourselves, even hating ourselves. That's what we're dealing with in Am Yisrael. We have a lot of internalized pain. How do we transform that at its root? The source of life is the source of love. It's the source of all healing. When you look at the spooky books, as Rabbi Kellerman called them, if you look at the Sifrei Kabbalah, it's like what heals all of the midot is chesed. It's Hashem's light.
Wow. So beautiful, so insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Should I share a couple other stories that are worth maybe sharing?
Definitely. That was
So
an incredible story.
Another way that this is relevant is like when you're making a bracha, and it could be during the week, or this is something you could really bring into Shabbos, right? I sat with someone this week who's dealing with a lot of anxiety. She just got engaged. She's always had anxiety. She's freaking out, right? So here was the direction. It's Shabbos, and we learn some meditation techniques like this. It's Shabbos, you sit down, you wash your hands at the table, you're waiting for the rest of your family to come sit down. Just feel your body sitting in the chair. Let the chair support you. Feel your breathing. And then the same process of realizing that every breath is a neshama. Let yourself know that God's breathing you. Let yourself just like sink in and realize that Hashem's with you in this moment and feel that through your breathing. And then make the bracha. It's a totally different bracha. Wow. You could contemplate while you're chewing not just forcing that food down, but knowing that it's a gift from Hashem. You could contemplate the miracle of your digestion. Asher b'yatzarat adam b'chachma uvaro chalalim chalalim nikavim. Like, okay, we know there's one big opening here, but your digestive system has thousands or millions of openings and tubes that enable the process by which your miraculous body extracts nutrients and leaves the waste behind. And it's a miracle beyond anything any human being has even conceived of. So contemplate that. You're not trying to control it, but you're just becoming aware that there's a miracle inside of you while you're slowly eating and appreciating your food and contemplating that Hashem is enlivening you and giving you nourishment. And if you want to take it one step forward, you can realize that this food that you're eating has nitzotzot. It's got sparks of kedusha. There's sparks of light. It exists because God gave it life. It was produced through some manufacturing cycle, whether it was a growing chicken or wheat or like bananas being grown, and you're about to receive that light of spark of Hashem in that food. And so letting that be part of your bracha and part of your eating meditation. And you can do it in 5 minutes. You can do it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday before going to work or at lunchtime. You can pause and bring that into your day. So it's not some extra thing you have to do, but it's a way that you take our relationship and the gift we have from Hashem of all these tefillas and brachas and kavanas and intentions that you don't have to get weird and Kabbalistic about, but just simply knowing that God's given it to you and appreciating that and sinking into gratitude and feeling it and making a felt sense of experience while you eat.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. And just wanted to share. So I'm sure you know about the blue zones, and I read it. I read Dan Bittner's book, The Blue Zones, probably like 8 years ago. I was really fascinated by the thought that we are Hashem's holy nation. Hashem chose us, and we're not. We can't consider ourselves, getting into that as a blue zone. But I think if we all lived as you mentioned with everything we've been talking about in this podcast, we'd definitely be the 8th blue zone in the world. But yeah,
Great. That's great.
beautiful.
Can I add something to that just to climb on your shoulders? So like the blue zones, as people probably know, is that there's certain areas in the world where people live a really, really long time. And these researchers went and studied them, like, what are they doing differently? And there's all these lifestyle things that they're doing, which is not typical, like, for sure it's not Ashkenazi food. The Sephardim in Eretz Israel are much healthier. But like in Eretz Israel, people are a bit more healthy. And for sure the Sephardic tradition, I think there's a bit more connection and earthiness that, the average person, my friends who are Sephardi tend to eat more vegetables and more alive than the average Ashkenazi brown food family where I came from. But I think what I want to add to that, if I could, is that, if I could add to that, which is that our choices in how we eat and our choices how we live come from our nefesh. They come from our inner knowing. And as Ashkenazi Jews, having lived through what we've lived through culturally in Galut and all the difficult stuff, we have a lot of collective pain. We've dealt with a lot of social pressure, like, okay, you didn't have fresh greens in the Ukraine, and neither did my grandparents. But even now, we're not necessarily tuned in to the vitality and aliveness in our bodies. And that's how I grew up. I grew up eating standard American diet, gradually started keeping kosher, but like it was gradual. And the Rambam talks in Shmoni Prakim about how the health of the nefesh is what determines what we do and how we eat. My own experience is that as I've gotten quieter, as I've started to listen more on the inside, as I've connected more with my intuition rather than social pressure of what I should and shouldn't eat, my food choices have changed. I'm naturally much more drawn at this point in my life to eating a big salad with some, salmon on it or sardines or something than a hamburger. I just don't really want that hamburger. Once a month, I love to eat good meat. Like my body, I think, needs that. That gets to one of your other questions about what's the ideal diet, right? But, I think when we learn to start tuning into ourselves, then we're naturally going to choose healthier eating. And to me, I feel like part of that tuning into the neshama piece, part of what that does is brings us a little bit more into a relationship of peace with the nefesh. And we start to actually relate to ourselves on the inside in a way that's more shalem. And from that place, maybe we start to make healthier choices about what's good for us.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Just to add to that, I was talking to a friend of mine in shul about how, as you mentioned, the Ashkenazi food is not the healthiest. And if we think about where it all started, the kugels, the gefilte fish, in those times we weren't thinking about nutrition. We were thinking about survival, right? And how many as many calories as you can pack into a kugel or a gefilte fish. But still, even though we're not living in those times, Baruch Hashem, we're not we're not living in old times of Ukraine and getting the pogroms and all of that. Still, we're eating this the same foods.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally, living in Eretz Israel and living in a much more mixed, like all the Jewish worlds coming together and seeing the way we're influencing each other. I'm hoping, like from point of view of health and well-being, that the Ashkenazim, we're going to learn from our Sephardi brothers and sisters and our Temanese Sephardi brothers and sisters, our Mizrahi Sephardi brothers and sisters about like eating, like emotional awareness, having a little bit more song and simcha. There's a lot we can learn. So D'ezrat Hashem, that's going to happen as time goes forward.
Yeah, 100%.
Can I share a little running meditation? I know you got a lot of runners and exercisers.
Yeah, definitely.
So, just one other way to work with this idea of actual God consciousness in the emotions, in the body, in the breathing is, say you love to run or bike and do endurance exercises. And so while you're doing that, the invitation is contact your sense of breathing. So it's not just, I was a competitive swimmer, competitive runner, biathlons, triathlons, really got into that stuff. And there's this potency of bringing consciousness and awareness into the breathing and synchronizing your breathing in your body. Most serious runners know that. You're running with your breathing, right? So you're already right next to the opportunity to be breathing Hashem into your body too. So while you're synchronizing, you're running and you're breathing and your feet hitting the ground and your arms pumping, just giving a little bit of attention that it's Hashem that's breathing you, that kol nishima hu neshama, and you're just reflecting that it's Hashem's vitality and aliveness flowing through you, and gratitude that you have the ability to run. Because, running and working out can be this arduous, painful sort of thing, like, it doesn't feel good, it's hurt, blah, 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 blah. Again, it's a nefesh neshama thing. Because if you're running and at the beginning, you get yourself into this mindset where you realize you're plugged into Hashem, suddenly the irritation or the bother or even the pain of your body becomes less obvious. I don't think it would bring you to the point where like you have break your ankle on a rock and you'll just keep running and make it worse. God forbid. But the sort of obstacle that the nefesh becomes starts to get less prominent and less intense when you put yourself into God consciousness, and you're in God consciousness, and that's good. So that's another thing.
Wow, beautiful.
So another way that like plugging into God consciousness can be transformative, I feel like I learned when my daughter was born and she was 2 or 3 months old, and I was working. My wife was not. So she was on first call when the baby got up, and she'd do all the normal stuff like change the diaper and feed the baby. But then sometimes the baby would keep crying. And so she'd wake me up and I'd go out there with my baby and stand there in the living room. And, if everything I did studying 20 years osteopathy and all this like mindfulness and studying Torah and Panemius was just for these moments with my daughter, it would all be worthwhile. But here's what I would do. She's screaming. And when babies scream, their faces are like, that hard, scrunched up face, and she's screaming. And I just look at her. And at first I'd noticed that part inside me that's like, how do I make her be quiet and shake her and all those things we do, which are kind of physical, mechanical. How do I get her to quiet, turn her over, did all these things, sing to her, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sometimes those work, but sometimes those don't. And meanwhile, Abba's getting more and more irritated potentially. And that's just like driving things in the wrong direction, because this is a neshama. She just came into a body. She's so sensitive. She feels you. She feels your emotions and she feels your attention. And so what I started to do was, first of all, soften my hands. Let my hands be soft and just feel her quivering, resonate with every little vibration, and resonate with the sense of her breathing. And now babies tend to breathe faster than adults, maybe 3 or 4 times, depending on how excited they are. So she's breathing 3 times as fast as I am, but I'm synchronizing my breath so that I'm inhaling with every third inhalation of hers. So she's breathing, and I'm going. So I'm resonating with her on a breathing level. She feels that. Her breathing starts to slow down. I'm recognizing that she's a light. She's a Tzelem Elokim. I'm breathing with her. I'm feeling with her. And then in my own mind, I'm just bringing to mind Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. I'd sometimes just see it over her. Ari Kaplan talks about the Yud on the head, the Hey, the first Hey is on the shoulders, the Vav through the trunk, the Hey through the pelvis and the legs. Seeing her as a Yud, a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey, and experiencing me as an expression of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, and plugging into God's presence. And that's where we're connected. So we're connecting. I'm connecting with this little being on a physical level, on the level of breathing and physiology, on a level of heart harmonizing, on a level of neshama. My experience, maybe 30 times, was that as soon as I'd plug into Shem Havaya, her face went, and she just melted, and she was asleep. So it's something to consider playing with and trying, that there's levels of communication. And when you're doing that with your child, you're connecting to your own neshama, ruach, nefesh, right? And that's healthy for you, being in that space of quiet and meditation, relaxation. And my sense is that is what helps a child also calm down, because they're mirror neurons, right? Their brain is full of mirroring. They make the face we make. We smile at the baby smiles. We frown at the baby gets scared. It's we know these things. And so this is just extending that to let it be about the whole picture of who we are as Yidden, and let that be mashpia on our family. And my daughter's 6 now. I still do that with her. When she's distressed, I still go to that space, and she feels it. The stuff that happens to kids. What are we going to be when the child starts to misbehave? Am I going to shift into the Abba, I need to discipline this child. She did something really wrong, and I'm going to yell or accuse or whatever I'm going to do? Or am I going to stop and go, oh, she's B'Tselem Elokim, I'm B'Tselem Elokim. Let's resonate with that for a second. That's Eitz Chaim before Eitz Das Tov Ra. Okay, sweetie, now you feel me. You feel that Abba loves you. Here's what you did. That wasn't okay. You need to do things differently. I love you. You need to do things differently.
Wow. So if we could shift a bit to nutrition, from your experience, what nutrition mistakes cause the most harm long-term?
Right. There's so much to this question. It's huge. But, if you look at all the nutrition research ever done, there's all this stuff out there. There's all these ideas. There's all these fads. There's all these diets. And a lot of it's just someone had an idea. A lot of it's someone looked in a physiology textbook and said, oh, it must be good to eat that. And maybe it is, but is it really? And nutritional research is really hard to do because it's all based on self-report and the data is fuzzy. So how do we really know? But if we look at the full body of nutrition research and we ask what supports longevity the most over decades of research, it's eating less calories. So less food consumption. That's huge. And so people overeat, and people often overeat because they're not eating for the right reasons, right? We looked at a little slide together earlier that we don't necessarily have to bring up here, or we could if you want. Should we bring up that slide?
Yeah, sure.
So let's just look at this slide. The simple title is Food Is, and it's got these 4 things: energy, information, connection, and medicine. It's a pretty bold, crazy statement, but it so resonates with me as someone who's been doing this and studying this for decades. And this whole thing about overeating and eating the wrong food that's unhealthy, that's poison for people, is because people are emphasizing food as connection and not
Mm,
food as energy and information and medicine.
wow. Yeah.
Because most of us, like wherever you look, you see it. The child is crying. The parent wants the child not to cry. And this isn't to blame parents, because it's really hard to be a parent. So it's like there's no shame and blame, but like just something let's be aware of. And like, okay, here, eat this. Like stick something in the child's mouth, and then they get quiet. And so we condition our children, we condition ourselves that when we feel emotional distress, we eat something. And
Mm,
frequently, the most common things we eat when we feel emotional distress are sweets and simple carbohydrates. Like I'm sure you've learned, I know you're very into like coaching and diet and all this stuff, but like gluten has compounds in there that are like morphine, they're endorphins. And the reason why like eating pasta and bread feels so good is, first of all, there's a big rush of blood sugar, and there's a rush of flavor and dopamine that feels good. But then there's this like opiate-like effect that it has on our body. And these are probably, we don't really know for sure, but it's probably part of the reason why the person who like feels uncomfortable emotionally eats a bunch of comfort food like sugar or simple carbs. They feel better for a while, and then they crash and they're hungry again later.
yeah.
And research has been done over and over. I had a friend, David Ludwig in Boston, he's a big nutrition researcher, and he pioneered these studies that looked at giving these shakes to adolescents. And both shakes taste the same texture and all of that. And one shake was high carbohydrate, low protein. The other one was higher protein and fiber and less carbohydrate. And guess who ate more calories during the course of the day? The kids who ate those shakes, the carbohydrate shake in the morning or the protein shake in the morning? Yes, the carbohydrate. You eat a lot of carbs, you want to eat more carbs. You eat protein, it creates satiety that lasts a longer period of time.
Mm,
So there's two pieces in this. Like, what are the unhealthy things? One is using food as connection and overlooking the opportunity of healing the emotion.
wow.
It's not so easy to heal emotion, and it's not a realm that a lot of people want to accept. I have people coming to me all the time with chronic illness, and what I can see in that long, elaborate history from birth till now is there's a lot of emotional distress and there's been trauma, and they are doing stuff that's coming from a place of I'm not okay inside. And when we don't feel okay inside, we look for something to help us feel okay. Frequently, that's food. And so that's comfort eating that leads to overeating and eating foods that can be unproductive and unhealthy. And whatever emotions we have inside, whatever difficult, challenging things, those are opportunities for healing. They're opportunities for healing. Your neshama wants your emotional state to be good and positive. Your neshama comes into a place of simcha. Your neshama can help you find a place of simcha. It's a voda. It's not easy, but there's lots of practitioners and people with good Torah hashkafa out there who are teaching these processes of bringing emunah into the body, into life, transforming emotional pain through emunah. If you're an overeater, if you can't stop that, if you're a comfort food binger and it's hard to stop, look to the emotions. Look to what feels uncomfortable. And rather than seeing it as something broken or wrong with you, see it as something that your neshama came into this world to meet, to transform, and to elevate. And start to elevate it, because there's ways of doing that in our generation.
Yeah.
The world's waking up.
Wow. Yeah, so beautiful. And just thinking about when you mentioned food as connection, we as Yidden, there's a lot of food that is connected to how we connect. You have the
Yeah,
kugel, you have the cholent, you have all these things that
yeah,
you eat on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, and you start to associate it with connection. And it's funny, it brings up a story with a friend of mine
yeah.
who sent me a picture that he was eating like Thursday night, like 11 p.m. cholent with kugel. And I was like telling him, I was like, listen, this is not the best thing you could do for your health. And he
Right.
was saying, like, listen, this is what we do. This is what we've done for many years. And I told him, I was like, listen, do you think that Avraham Avinu ate cholent and kugel? you know? It's like we have to, I think, get back to the basics and really, yeah, as you mentioned, like the connection part is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so with you on that. And what you said evoked a couple of thoughts that maybe are worth sharing here. One is that first of all, like I'm also Choser B'Tshuva, probably obvious, but like, I lived in Muncie, New York for 9 years and had good fortune of being connected with such unbelievable Torah Yidden from way back, right? And so I lived in like Hasidish Muncie, and it was incredible. And sat down and ate cholent and white bread, and like went the whole Ashkenazi brown food way for years. I do my own thing when I was at home. I respect it. I appreciate it. So I don't want to speak against it because I do
Yeah,
understand that there's a deep value in that Masorah of doing what our Zaydis and Alta Zaydis and Bubbies did.
yeah,
But at the same time, I want to acknowledge what we know Al Piteva. And what we know Al Piteva is that for a lot of people, gluten's really unhealthy. Not for everybody, but if it's unhealthy for you, stop eating it, and find out what does work for you. And there's ways around it from a halachic point of view. We also know is that, the simple carbs, like I talked about, and what makes food brown. This is a little bit of nutritional biochemistry thing. There's a concept called glycation end products. And glycation end products are what happens when you cook carbohydrates and fats together. They turn brown. And those are free radicals. They're highly reactive molecules that generate inflammation. And most brown food, it's really tasty because of those, because it's cooked like that. But that's part of what drives inflammation. And so, if when someone comes to me who's Hasidish and they've got some sort of metabolic thing or inflammatory thing, they don't have to be Hasidish. They can be traditional and not Hasidish, whatever it is. They love their kugel and their challah and their whatever and their cholent. Like, you don't have to eat that much of it. You could eat a little bit and
yeah,
plug in, and also eat something else that's going to help clean up the free radicals that you're consuming.
yeah,
Like I often tell people, eat the rainbow. The rainbow means all the colorful food. Fresh,
yeah,
colorful food is full of molecules that counteract the glycation end products and other free radical producing compounds that generate inflammation and sickness of our blood vessels and all of that. And so, like, maybe this is the tikkun of Ashkenazim coming together with Sfardim. Like, let's think about it that way. Why not? Let's have like
yeah,
some, whatever.
yeah, yeah. Love that. So as you mentioned, there's so many diets out there. There's a diet of the week. I have so
Yeah,
many friends that are big on different diets,
yeah.
and but it can get confusing. Like, what would you say would be an optimal diet for a person that's trying to be healthy and look
Yeah,
out for longevity? Yeah,
right. So I'm very wary of making general proclamations like that because we have biochemical individuality. We're different. We're not all the same.
yeah,
Even if we're
yeah,
from similar cultural heritages, we're often not all the same. And our history has been different. And there's so many variables in that. And so I
yeah,
think a person needs to be really careful to, again, listen into the nefesh and start to find what works and what's healthy for you. There's some general principles, which is that less simple carbohydrates and more colorful, lots of variety of colors and vegetables, preferably fresh vegetables if your body can digest it and tolerate it, but some people can't. Some people need things that are more cooked, but knowing that when you cook vegetables, you start breaking down all their nutrients immediately. But lots of colorful foods, lots of fiber, healthy, lean protein that's good from good protein sources like, it's not easy to find wild fish, but it's good to eat wild fish. There's more omega-3 fatty acids. Farmed fish often doesn't have that much of it. It's like everyone's into salmon, right? Salmon is pink. It's got omega-3 fatty acids, right? A lot of farmed salmon, they feed it grain for most of its life. And then before they harvest it, they feed it stuff that makes it pink. So it looks like nice, healthy salmon, but it's really just like, it's like cattle raised on grain. It's not so different.
wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy, right? So
But
it's not easy. It's not easy. And there's this other aspect of it, which is that like ocean fish often has the risk of contamination. We got heavy metals in our oceans. And so we have to be careful about that. Some people are more susceptible than others. Little fish tend to be less because when there's contaminants in the food chain, they build up as creatures get bigger and bigger. So a 50-pound, tuna is going to contain a lot more toxic compounds than a sardine.
Sardine, yeah.
So like I personally eat a lot of sardines and
Yeah.
small tuna, not big tuna. Like solid white tuna is made out of big tuna. Chunk light is made out of smaller tuna. So these aren't absolute things. These are general things. I'm going off of track a little bit about like, what's the optimal diet, right? I know that's your question and I don't have a good answer. It's like the basic principles are you should have more living vegetables on your plate than meat and starch.
Yeah.
There's a couple other things. Like, I work with nutritionists who have all these great little sayings like pasta is not a meal, right? Pasta is a side dish. If you love pasta, eat pasta, but it's a side dish. Have a big salad with it. Have a nice piece of healthy grown, protein source, whether it's a vegetable protein source like beans or fish or chicken or lean, healthy grown meat. I've heard a lot of people talk about plant-based diets, and it gets a lot of energy these days for good reason, because there's been good research demonstrating, wow, we shifted people from a standard American diet to a plant-based diet, and people did so much better. And my sense is you can't really go wrong with a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
Unless your body needs to eat more meat. And so everyone's different in that. Like I was a vegetarian for years. And when I was first becoming religious, one of the first chasanas I went to, they just put a piece of chicken in front of me. And I was like sitting at the table with the chassan and his parents were there. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to like do the harmonious thing and eat the chicken. And I ate it and I was like, oh my gosh, that felt so good. My body, I just felt alive and I felt so good from it. And so some people I think do need flesh. They need to eat more. And so we have to find out who we are and know what that is. And we can't always know, and another person can't always know unless they really have Ruach HaKodesh, but I don't. So what I typically recommend is common sense stuff and then adjust per you. And, for instance, let's, if we can bring it into a clinical situation for a second. So somebody came to me this week with chronic pain all over her body, and it's been for years, and she's got some fatigue and some other stuff going on. And many people have food sensitivities. And so some people are sensitive to gluten, some people are sensitive to dairy, some people are sensitive to sugar. Like who is, who isn't, we can't really know. There's like tests for food sensitivity that aren't really so reliable. But what I recommend to people is spend a month, don't eat gluten, dairy, and sugar for a month. Stop it completely. And if somebody's listening to this and you've got like all over your body aching or fatigue or chronic headaches or your mood's just heavy and you feel crummy for a long time, consider doing an elimination diet. But some people get mixed up and they try to do it forever. They'll come to me. I've never met them before. I'm like, so what are you eating? They're like, I'm on an elimination diet. I don't eat any gluten or dairy or sugar. I'm like, for how long? They're like, 4 years. I hate it. I can't stand it. I'm like, oh, that's not how you do it. You do it for a month. It's a test. Wow. You know how you feel after a month. And after a month of not doing that, how do you feel? Oh my gosh, I'm 50% better. Oh, there's a clue. Maybe one of those foods is bothering you. So let's test that. Add the gluten back in, or add the thing that you're missing the most. Maybe the person loves cheese, or they can never get used to almond milk in their coffee and they want to put regular milk in. So add the dairy back in and do it for a week before you judge how you feel. And after a week, see how you feel. And sometimes the person will come back and say, I ate dairy for a week and I felt horrible. I'm like, okay, what do you want to do now? So their nefesh is just learned. And they're like, I don't want to eat dairy. I'm not telling them not to eat dairy. They learned it from their experience. Same thing with gluten, same thing with sugar. A lot of people with the kind of chronic stress, widespread pain, fibromyalgia thing, they stop eating sugar. Things get a whole lot better. They start eating sugar, it gets worse. They learn themselves. But you got to give them the direction to shift, see how it feels, shift back, see how it feels, and let your body teach you and tell you. And I would say the same thing to someone who, feels like they want to do better health over long. They know they're eating a lot of meat or whatever it is, and they want to try plant-based diet. Great, try it. See how it goes. See how you feel. Give it a couple of months. Notice how you feel. And then at some point, try eating a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or whatever. Eat something and see how you feel. And
Yeah.
let your body tell you.
Wow.
What's
Okay.
what's your experience of plant-based? Are you stark on that? That's what you do all the time, or
So no, I'm actually very similar to what Michael Kaufman does. As majority of what I eat is plant based, and
uh-huh,
then I also add a bit of fish, like salmon,
uh-huh,
sardines, things
right,
like that. And then on Shabbos, I do eat meat because my family prefers it. Um, but yeah, I'm not like as you mentioned, like, every person is different. They need to figure out that, for themselves. So I'm not like on the group saying everyone has to be plant-based, this is the way. I totally agree that people need to figure out what works best for them. But
yeah,
majority, I think that a plant-based diet is a good idea for many to try out.
yeah,
And
I
I
agree
got
with
that
you.
from the Blue Zones. The Blue Zones, I
Yeah,
saw the
yes,
similarities between all of them
yeah,
is that you know they're
I'm
eating
with you. Yeah,
plant-based.
for
Yeah.
sure. Like I want to just circle around based on that and say that like I agree with that in general, that like we should get most of our food from plants. And then
Yeah.
some people need augmentation for various reasons, depending on who they are and what their needs are. And so I agree with that for sure, is that it's probably what's best for most people. It's like keto. Let's talk about keto, right? We got to talk about keto. We're talking about diet. And like,
Yeah.
keto has a very powerful physiologic effect. Ketosis does something important, and it switches and shifts our metabolism in ways that can be incredibly powerful with people with diabetes or metabolic disturbances or mitochondrial dysfunction, and those all kind of go together with each other. But I don't know that any sane person would say that it should be a long-term diet, because
That's
you're
true.
depriving
Yeah.
yourself, first of all, depriving yourself of all those healthy compounds that we talked about in vegetables and fruits. And also you're just, overloading your system with so much protein and all of the metabolic challenge the body has in digesting and
Yeah.
eliminating waste from protein.
Dr. Schiller, it's been really such an amazing and fascinating conversation with you.
Yeah.
If you would leave our viewers with one message, what would that be?
Hmm. One message: trust God. No, seriously, I mean, I see it
That's
time,
great.
but really,
Yeah.
I think it's like Mr. Kaufman said, that whatever we do for our health and well-being, whether it's mechanical, structural, physical stuff, or metabolic, biochemical, nutritional stuff, or mind-body stuff, if we infuse that with a sense of relationship with Hashem, at whatever degree is meaningful for us, whether it's an intellectual knowing that God's there all the time, or an emotional and physical embodiment of whoosh that we connect to Hashem with, that is going to empower and potentiate, as we say, whatever other things we do. It's going to make them work better. And so let's remember who we are in the world, that we're here to serve Hashem, and let's bring that into the things we're doing for Pikuach Nefesh and health, and let's be inspired.
Wonderful, wonderful. And if people would like to work with you or contact you, what would be the best way to do that?
Sure. If people want to be in touch or hear more from me, there's two pathways. One is directly contacting me through my office, and I not only do integrative functional medicine consultation, but also one-on-one coaching for people who are coping with health crisis around really healing body, mind, spirit through the teachings of our Torah and our sages. And the second is that I have a Substack where doing my writing and videos, and everything's going to be going through there. And that's where I'm going to be doing most of my online teaching. And so I'll give you those links so that you can share them with guests who want to check that out.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you so much again. It's been
All
so
right.
wonderful.
Pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for having me.